Now, we've been talking a lot about the process of meiosis, but let's go back and look at the big picture of meiosis. Meiosis is involved in sexual life cycles because meiosis produces the gametes that come together at fertilization. And the big thing about meiosis and sexual life cycles is that they contribute a lot of genetic variation, which then in turn allows for evolution and natural selection to occur. So what we're going to take a look at today is how do sexual life cycles and meiosis contribute to this genetic variation and thus evolution. Now, one thing we need to point out is that the original genetic variations, what makes blue eyes and brown eyes and green eyes different, originates from some sort of mutation in the DNA. This can be a base pair substitution, this can be a complete flip-flopping of chromosomes, but mutations are our original source of any sort of variation within a population. Now, the reshuffling of these differences, the reshuffling of alleles, is our origin of genetic variation. So sexual life cycles and meiosis contribute to this shuffling, this reshuffling and moving and combining different chromosomes in different ways during sexual life cycles and fertilization. And this can happen in three mechanisms. One is the independent assortment of chromosomes. Two is crossing over, which we've talked about. And three is what we call random fertilization. So what we're going to take a look at today is those three things and how they contribute to genetic variation. So firstly, looking at independent assortment of chromosomes, this goes back to the process of meiosis and how the homologous chromosome pairs line up during metaphase 1 of meiosis 1. Now, as usual, this is better to take a look at this visually, so I'm going to flip ahead for a second. So if we look at possibility 1, we have two homologous pairs, so the diploid number for this particular species would be 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or two homologous pairs. And depending on how these line up, let's say all of dad's chromosomes line up on the left and mom's chromosomes line up on the right, when they separate during meiosis 1, this is what our results would be, and when these further separate during meiosis 2, this is what our combinations would be. So this particular possibility, we ended up with one of each, so one from dad, and one from mom, one from mom. Now, this isn't the only possibility of how these chromosomes can line up and separate. For example, if we have, instead of having all of dads on the left, we have one of dads on the left, one of dads on the right. When these separate, they go through meiosis 1, go through meiosis 2, we have a totally different combination produced in the gametes. So this is one way that meiosis and sexual life cycles can contribute to genetic variation, because this could be the egg that would be fertilized, or maybe this would be an egg that would be fertilized, or maybe this would be an egg that would be fertilized. And that's 3 or 4 or 5 different combinations of chromosomes and how they assort into different gametes. So we call that independent assortment, how they end up in each of the gametes. Now, we looked at an example with an organism that had a diploid number of 4, or 2 homologous pairs. Now let's go back and look at humans. Our diploid number is 46, and if we do a little bit of math here, if we take 2 to the nth, with n being the haploid number, so 2 to the 23rd, this is roughly 8.4 million different possible combinations of chromosomes in just one meiotic event. So just one meiosis, there's a possibility of 8.4 million different ways that the chromosomes can assort into the gametes. So as you can see, this happening independently of anything really contributes to genetic variation within a population. And if we just think about this logically, think about the human population. Other than identical twins, no two people on Earth are genetically identical. No two people on Earth have ever been genetically identical. And this is one of the reasons why that is the case. So in addition to this independent assortment, how the chromosomes end up in the gametes, we also have another factor going on in meiosis that we've learned about called crossing over. So when those homologous chromosomes are paired up, we can have a recombinant chromosome event, or a crossing over event, during prophase 1, and one portion of the chromosome flips with the homologous chromosome that is attached to. So if we look at this, we have dad's chromosome and mom's chromosome paired up. and they switch some pieces of their chromosomes. So now we have recombinant chromosomes, where dad's chromosome now has pieces of mom's, and mom's chromosome now has pieces of dad's. So now if we look at how these end up in the daughter cells, these are brand new, specifically the two in the middle. These are brand new chromosomes that have never ever been made before. So if we contribute this and this idea of independent assortment, that 8.4 million combinations actually increases, because now we have brand new combinations of chromosomes because they're mixed up. Mom's DNA and dad's DNA is mixed up and combined with each other. Now, the last way that meiosis and sexual life cycles contribute to genetic variation. Oops, sorry, we're back. So the third way that things can contribute to genetic variation is this idea of random fertilization. So if each parent has 8.4 million possible chromosome combinations, so 8.4 million possible gametes, one of those may or may not fertilize the egg. They may or may not come together. So if we combine those two numbers, 8.4 and 8.4, one from mom, one from dad, that gives us 70 trillion different diploid combinations when egg and sperm come together. So again, tying this back to just logic, this is why organisms are not genetically identical, and the human race is not genetically identical, because we have all of these combinations that come together. Adding our other thing of crossing over, this adds even more to that number, so we could increase that number even more. So each zygote, each individual, has its own unique genetic identity, which is kind of a cool thing to think about. You are genetically unique, and you are one out of trillions of possible combinations that could have happened. So even though this is, a cool concept to think about, what is the significance of this to biology and to the evolution of species? Well, what we're going to see when we talk about evolution is that natural selection and evolution act upon populations with genetic variation. Those with quote-unquote the strongest traits survive, and those with the quote-unquote weakest traits do not survive. So in a population there's genetic variation, and those that are the strongest will survive. Those with the best traits will survive. So this genetic variation is very, very important to populations. The sexual reproduction, the independent assortment, the crossing over, the random fertilization all contribute to that genetic variation. So that can contribute to natural selection and evolution. So what you're going to take a look at next is just a little activity to kind of model this so that you can kind of wrap your heads around this a little bit better.